Just a homeless black man at the boxing gym, until the young fighter noticed his scar. The smell of sweat and leather filled the air as Malik Thompson threw another combination at the heavy bag. His gloves connected with satisfying thuds that echoed through Rodriguez Boxing Gym, a place where dreams were either made or shattered. At 19, Malik had already made a name for himself in the local circuit, winning 7 fights in a row with a knockout power that had promoters starting to take notice. "Keep your left up, Thompson!" shouted Coach Rivera from across the room. "You drop that guard, and you'll be eating canvas!" Malik nodded, sweat dripping from his brow as he adjusted his stance. The gym was buzzing with activity, seasoned fighters working the speed bag, younger kids learning the basics on the double-end bag, and the constant shuffle of feet on the canvas ring where sparring sessions played out like carefully choreographed dances of violence. But there was something else that caught Malik's attention, something that had been bothering him for weeks now. In the far corner of the gym, partially hidden behind a stack of old equipment and worn-out gym bags, sat a figure that didn't quite belong. The man was homeless. That much was obvious from his tattered clothing and the way he seemed to live in that corner. His beard was unkempt, his clothes were layers of mismatched fabrics, and he carried the distinct smell of someone who had been living on the streets. What puzzled Malik wasn't the man's presence. Rodriguez Gym had always been tolerant of people down on their luck, sometimes letting them stay during the harsh winter months. What bothered him was the way the man watched everything. His eyes weren't the glazed, distant look of someone who had given up on life. Instead, they were sharp, calculating, following every movement in the gym with an intensity that made Malik's skin crawl. The man never spoke to anyone. He would arrive sometime in the morning, position himself in that same corner, and sit there for hours, watching. The other fighters had long since stopped noticing him. To them, he was just part of the furniture, another piece of the gym's rough character that they had learned to ignore. But Malik couldn't ignore him. "You see him too, don't you?" asked Tommy Martinez, a middleweight who had been training at Rodriguez for 3 years. Tommy had noticed Malik's wandering glances toward the corner. "Yeah, I see him," Malik replied, unwrapping his hands after finishing his bag work. "How long has he been coming around?" "About 6 months now," Tommy said, toweling off his face. "Coach Rivera lets him stay as long as he doesn't cause trouble. Poor guy probably has nowhere else to go." Malik nodded, but something didn't sit right with him. The way the man carried himself, even while sitting in that corner, suggested someone who had once commanded respect. His posture was straight despite his circumstances, and there was something about the way he held his head that reminded Malik of the old-school fighters he'd seen in documentaries. "Has he ever said anything? About boxing, I mean?" Tommy shrugged. "Never heard him speak a word." "Why? You thinking of starting a conversation?" "Maybe," Malik said, though he wasn't sure why the idea appealed to him. The next day, Malik found himself paying even closer attention to the mysterious figure. During his sparring session with Carlos, a tough southpaw who had been giving him trouble, Malik noticed the homeless man lean forward slightly when Carlos threw a particular combination. It was subtle, but Malik caught it, a small nod of approval, as if the man understood exactly what had just happened in the ring. After the session, as Malik cooled down, he caught the man's eye. Instead of looking away, the homeless man held his gaze for a moment, and Malik saw something that made his breath catch. The man's eyes weren't just sharp, they were knowing. They held the kind of understanding that only came from experience, real experience. "You got potential, kid," Coach Rivera said, approaching with a towel. "But you're getting distracted. I saw you looking over at old Jerome again." "Jerome?" Malik asked. "That's what we call him. Don't know his real name. Been coming around for months now. Harmless enough, but you can't let him break your focus." Malik nodded, but as he glanced back at the corner, he realized something that made his pulse quicken. The man, Jerome, was no longer just watching the fighters. He was studying them. His eyes moved with the practiced precision of someone who understood every nuance of what was happening in the ring. And right now, those eyes were focused entirely on him. The following week, Malik made a decision that would change everything. He arrived at the gym early, before the usual crowd, and found Jerome already in his corner. The morning light streaming through the high windows cast long shadows across the gym floor, and in that soft light, Malik noticed something he hadn't seen before. Jerome wasn't just sitting there waiting. He was shadowboxing. The movements were subtle, almost imperceptible, but Malik's trained eye caught them. Jerome's shoulders would shift slightly, his feet would adjust their position, and his hands would move in tiny, controlled gestures. He was working combinations in his head, and his body was responding to muscle memory that ran deeper than conscious thought. "You used to fight," Malik said quietly, approaching the corner. Jerome looked up, and for the first time, their eyes met directly. The man's face was weathered, marked by years of hardship, but there was something else there, a flicker of recognition, as if he had been waiting for someone to notice. "A long time ago," Jerome replied, his voice rough from disuse but carrying an unmistakable dignity. Malik felt his heart rate increase. There was something about the way Jerome spoke, something that suggested this wasn't just any former fighter. This was someone who had been somebody. "What weight class?" Malik asked, settling down near the corner, careful not to get too close. Jerome was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "Heavyweight," he finally said. "Back when heavyweights were still fighting, not just wrestling in the clinch." The way he said it, with a mixture of pride and pain, told Malik everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a former fighter, this was a former champion. "What happened?" Malik asked softly. Jerome's hand moved unconsciously to his left cheek, where Malik now noticed a faint scar running from just below his eye to the corner of his mouth. It was old, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, but it was there. "Life happened," Jerome said simply. "And when life happens to a fighter, it happens hard." As the morning wore on and other fighters began to arrive, Jerome retreated back into his silence. But something had changed. Malik could feel it in the air between them. A connection had been made, a door had been opened. For the rest of that week, Malik found himself arriving earlier and earlier, hoping to catch more moments of conversation with Jerome. But the man seemed to have retreated back into his shell, offering only nods and brief acknowledgments when Malik tried to engage him. It wasn't until the following Friday that everything changed. Malik was having a bad day. His timing was off, his combinations were sloppy, and Carlos had been landing clean shots all sparring session. Coach Rivera had been particularly harsh, and Malik was beginning to doubt himself. As he sat on a bench after training, his head in his hands, he felt someone sit down beside him. "You're telegraphing your right hand," Jerome said quietly. Malik looked up, surprised. Jerome was sitting beside him, closer than he had ever been before. "What?" "Your right hand. You drop your left shoulder before you throw it. Any decent fighter can see it coming from across the ring." Malik stared at him. "You were watching that closely?" Jerome nodded. "I've been watching you for months. You've got talent, real talent. But you're making mistakes that are going to get you hurt. Why are you telling me this?" Jerome was quiet for a moment, his hand again moving to touch that scar on his cheek. "Because I see myself in you. And I know what happens when talent meets the wrong kind of opportunity." The gym was emptying out around them, but neither man moved. Malik felt as if he was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into something that would change everything. "What's your real name?" Malik asked. Jerome looked at him for a long moment, and Malik saw something shift in his eyes, a decision being made. "Elijah," he said finally. "Elijah Stone." The name hit Malik like a physical blow. Elijah Stone. The Elijah Stone? The former heavyweight champion who had disappeared from the boxing world 15 years ago, right at the height of his career. "I'm nobody," Elijah said quickly, standing up. "I'm just a homeless man who watches boxing. And you're just a young fighter who needs to keep his left up." But as Elijah walked back to his corner, Malik knew that everything had changed. The greatest heavyweight champion of his generation was sitting in the corner of Rodriguez boxing gym, and for some reason, he was interested in helping a 19-year-old kid from the neighborhood. The question was, why? And more importantly, what was the real story behind that scar? 3 days passed before Malik worked up the courage to approach Elijah again. The revelation that the homeless man in the corner was actually Elijah Stone, the same fighter whose highlight reels Malik had watched countless times on YouTube, had left him speechless. Elijah Stone, the man who had dominated the heavyweight division for 3 years straight, who had knocked out legends and made millions, was sitting in a corner of Rodriguez' gym like a ghost from another world. It was a Tuesday evening, and the gym was nearly empty. Most of the fighters had gone home, leaving only the die-hard night owls and Malik, who had been working the heavy bag for 2 hours straight. His shoulders ached, his hands were raw despite the wraps, but he couldn't stop. Every time he threw a punch, he found himself thinking about what Elijah had said about telegraphing his right hand. "You're still dropping that shoulder," came a voice from behind him. Malik turned to find Elijah standing just a few feet away, closer than he had ever been before. In the dim light of the nearly empty gym, Elijah looked different, older, more weathered, but there was something in his posture that reminded Malik of the champion he used to be. "I've been trying to fix it," Malik said, pulling off his gloves. "But every time I throw hard, it just happens." "Muscle memory," Elijah said, nodding. "Bad habits die hard in boxing. Sometimes they die with the fighter." There was something ominous in the way he said it, and Malik felt a chill run down his spine. He sat down on a nearby bench, and to his surprise, Elijah sat down beside him. This close, Malik could see the scar on Elijah's cheek clearly for the first time. It was deeper than he had realized, a jagged line that spoke of violence and pain. "Can I ask you something?" Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elijah nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the empty ring in the center of the gym. "That scar, where did it come from?" Elijah's hand moved unconsciously to his cheek, his fingers tracing the old wound. For a moment, Malik thought he wouldn't answer. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the gym's fluorescent lights. "It came from the night I learned that boxing isn't just about who hits harder," Elijah finally said. "It's about who's willing to sacrifice everything to win." He paused, and Malik could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. This was clearly a story that Elijah had never told, a wound that went deeper than the physical scar. "It was 15 years ago," Elijah continued, his voice taking on a distant quality. "I was scheduled to fight Tommy the Hammer Rodriguez, no relation to your coach here. It was supposed to be the biggest fight of my career. The winner would get a shot at the undisputed championship." Malik knew the fight. Every boxing fan knew about it. It was the fight that never happened, the one that had mysteriously been cancelled at the last minute amid rumors of controversy. 2 weeks before the fight, I got a visit from some people. They weren't fans, and they weren't reporters. They were the kind of people who make their living in the shadows of the sport. Elijah's voice grew harder. They told me that I was going to lose that fight. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because that's what they needed to happen. "Fixed?" Malik asked, though he already knew the answer. "Fixed," Elijah confirmed. "Boxing has always had that element, but I was young and stupid enough to think I was above it. I told them exactly what they could do with their offer." Elijah stood up and walked to the ropes of the ring, gripping them tightly. 3 days later, I was walking out of a restaurant when 3 men jumped me in an alley. They didn't want to finish me, that would have been too obvious. They just wanted to send a message. Malik's blood ran cold. "The scar?" One of them had a knife. Not a big one, just a small blade. He told me it was a reminder of what happens when you don't listen to the right people. Elijah's voice was steady, but Malik could see the tension in his shoulders. He drew it across my face, slow and deliberate. Said it was so I'd remember our conversation every time I looked in the mirror. "Jesus," Malik whispered. "The funny thing is, the cut wasn't what ended my career. It healed fine, barely left a mark. But what it represented, that's what destroyed me." Elijah turned back to face Malik. "I realized that night that I wasn't just fighting other boxers. I was fighting a system that was bigger than me, more powerful than me. And I was losing. What happened to the fight? I withdrew. Told everyone I had a training injury. The truth was, I was scared. Not of getting hurt in the ring. I'd been getting hurt in rings my whole life. I was scared of what they'd do to me if I kept fighting their system. Elijah's laugh was bitter. The irony is, they won anyway. I disappeared from boxing, and they got what they wanted without having to fix anything. Malik felt a mixture of anger and sadness wash over him. So you just gave up? I didn't give up, Elijah said firmly. I made a choice. I chose to walk away rather than become part of something that was corrupting the sport I loved. But that choice cost me everything. My career, my reputation, my money, my family, everything. Your family? My wife couldn't understand why I walked away from millions of dollars. She thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. Elijah sat back down, suddenly looking every one of his 50-something years. When you lose everything that defines you, you start to lose yourself. That's how a former heavyweight champion ends up watching other people's dreams from the corner of a gym. The gym felt impossibly quiet around them. Malik stared at Elijah, trying to process everything he had just heard. The man sitting beside him wasn't just a former champion. He was a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly everything could fall apart. Why are you telling me this? Malik asked. Elijah looked at him with eyes that held decades of pain and wisdom. Because you remind me of who I used to be. And I see the same choices coming your way that I had to face. What do you mean? Success in boxing brings attention, kid. And not all of that attention is good. You're going to have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice to win. Elijah stood up, preparing to return to his corner. I'm telling you this story because I hope you'll make better choices than I did. As Elijah walked away, Malik sat alone on the bench, his mind racing. He had come to the gym looking for a simple training session, but he had ended up learning about the dark side of the sport he loved. The scar on Elijah's face wasn't just a mark of violence. It was a symbol of the price of integrity in a world that didn't always reward it. And now, Malik had to decide what price he was willing to pay. The conversation with Elijah haunted Malik for days. Every time he threw a punch, every time he stepped into the ring, he found himself thinking about corruption, about fixed fights, about the dark side of the sport that had always seemed so pure to him. But there were still pieces missing from Elijah's story, gaps that didn't quite add up. It was Friday afternoon when Malik finally got the courage to ask the questions that had been eating at him. He found Elijah in his usual corner, but this time, instead of sitting in silence, the older man was reading a newspaper someone had left behind. Can I sit? Malik asked. Elijah looked up and nodded. You've been thinking about what I told you. Yeah, I have. Malik settled beside him. But I don't understand something. You said you walked away from one fight, but that doesn't explain this. He gestured around the gym, at Elijah's shabby clothes, at the life of a homeless man. Elijah folded the newspaper carefully, his movements deliberate. You want to know how a man goes from making millions to living in gym corners? If you're willing to tell me. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, and Malik could see the internal debate playing out on his face. Finally, he spoke. After I pulled out of the Rodriguez fight, I thought I could just disappear for a while and then come back. I had money saved, endorsement deals, a big house in Beverly Hills. I figured I'd take a year off, let the heat die down, and then make my comeback. What happened? The boxing world is smaller than you think, kid. Word got around that I was unreliable. That I'd walked away from the biggest fight of my career for no good reason. Promoters started dropping me. Sponsors canceled contracts. The Boxing Commission launched an investigation into why I'd really withdrawn. Elijah's voice took on a bitter edge. The funny thing is, they were investigating me for the very thing I'd refused to do. They thought I was dirty, that I'd taken money to throw a fight that never even happened. Malik felt his stomach drop. They thought you were corrupt? Worse than that. They thought I was a coward who'd taken a payoff and then gotten cold feet. Elijah's hands clenched into fists. Everything I'd built, My entire reputation was destroyed by rumors and speculation. And I couldn't defend myself without revealing the truth about what had really happened. Why couldn't you tell them? Because the people who'd threatened me weren't just street thugs. They had connections throughout the sport. Judges, referees, commissioners, promoters, they had people everywhere. If I'd started talking, I wouldn't have just lost my career. I would have lost my life. The weight of Elijah's words settled over Malik like a heavy blanket. He was beginning to understand the impossible position the former champion had been in. So you just let them destroy you? I tried to fight it at first. I hired lawyers, publicists, anyone who would listen. But every time I thought I was making progress, something else would happen. A story would leak to the press about me being seen with known gamblers, gamblers I'd never met. Photos would surface of me in compromising situations, photos that had been doctored. Elijah stood up and began pacing the small space of his corner. They were systematic about it. They wanted to make sure I could never come back, never be a threat to their operations again. What about your family? Your wife? Sarah. Elijah's voice softened for the first time. She tried to stand by me at first. But watching millions of dollars disappear, watching our friends abandon us, watching the press tear me apart day after day, it broke her. She left? She left, and she took our daughter with her. Elena was only 8 years old. She didn't understand why Daddy was suddenly a bad man on TV, why we had to move out of our house, why Mommy was crying all the time. Malik felt a lump form in his throat. Do you still see them? Sarah remarried 3 years later. A doctor in Portland. Elena calls him Dad now. Elijah's voice was barely a whisper. I get a birthday card sometimes. She signs it Elena, not Daddy's girl like she used to. The silence stretched between them, heavy with pain and regret. The money? Malik asked gently. Gone. Legal fees, private investigators, trying to clear my name, it all added up. When you're fighting an enemy you can't see, using weapons you don't understand, money disappears fast. Elijah sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. The house, the cars, the investments, everything was tied up in lawsuits for years. By the time the dust settled, there was nothing left. How did you end up on the streets? Pride, mostly. I had friends who would have helped, but I couldn't stand the pity in their eyes. I couldn't stand being the cautionary tale, the former champion who'd lost everything. Elijah's laugh was hollow. So I disappeared. Changed my name, moved from city to city, did odd jobs when I could find them. For 15 years? For 15 years. And you know what the worst part is? I started believing their lies about me. Started thinking maybe I was a coward. Maybe I should have just taken their money and thrown the fight. At least then I'd still have my family. Malik felt anger rising in his chest. You did the right thing. Did I? Look at me, kid. Look at what doing the right thing cost me. Elijah's eyes were filled with pain. I lost everything that mattered to me because I was too proud to be corrupted. Sometimes I wonder if pride is just another word for stupidity. You said you see yourself in me, Malik said quietly. What did you mean? Elijah turned to look at him directly. You're talented, ambitious, and you still believe in the purity of the sport. You think boxing is about heart and skill and determination. Just like I did. And you think I'm wrong? I think you're naive. And I think that naivety is going to be tested soon. Elijah's voice grew urgent. You're getting noticed, Malik. Your name is starting to appear in the right conversations. And when that happens, people are going to come to you with offers that seem too good to refuse. What kind of offers? The kind that come with strings attached. The kind that require you to look the other way, to make certain compromises, to be a good soldier in someone else's fight. Elijah gripped Malik's shoulder. And when that happens, you're going to have to decide whether you want to be a champion or whether you want to keep your soul. As Elijah released his grip and settled back into his corner, Malik felt the weight of the older man's story settling on his shoulders. He was beginning to understand that success in boxing wasn't just about training and talent. It was about navigating a world where the rules weren't always clear, and where the wrong choice could cost you everything. The question was, when his moment came, what choice would he make? The following Monday, Malik arrived at the gym to find Elijah standing near the heavy bags, no longer relegated to his corner. There was something different about him, straighter posture, more alert eyes, as if sharing his story had lifted some invisible weight from his shoulders. "You ready to learn something they don't teach in boxing school?" Elijah asked without preamble. Malik glanced around the gym. Coach Rivera was working with another fighter, and the usual crowd hadn't arrived yet. "What do you mean?" "I mean the real boxing. The kind that kept me alive for 3 years as heavyweight champion." Elijah picked up a pair of worn gloves from a nearby bench. "You interested, or are you satisfied with being another pretty fighter who gets exposed when the lights get bright?" There was challenge in Elijah's voice, and Malik felt something stir in his chest. "What do you want me to do?" "First, forget everything you think you know about defense." Elijah moved to the center of the gym's open space. "Modern boxing teaches you to keep your hands up, stay tight, protect yourself. That's fine for amateurs, but it's not enough when you're facing someone who really wants to hurt you." Elijah began moving, and Malik was amazed by the transformation. The homeless man from the corner had vanished, replaced by someone who moved like water, like smoke, like something that couldn't be touched. "Defense isn't about blocking punches," Elijah continued, his footwork creating subtle angles that made him appear to be in 3 places at once. "It's about making them miss so badly they forget why they threw the punch in the first place." For the next hour, Elijah taught Malik movements that seemed to defy the basic principles of boxing. Instead of stepping back from punches, he showed him how to step forward into them, how to use an opponent's momentum against them. Instead of keeping his hands high, he demonstrated how to keep them low and use shoulder rolls and head movement to avoid damage. "This is called the Philadelphia shell," Elijah explained, demonstrating a defensive stance that looked almost lazy. "Floyd Mayweather made it famous, but it's older than that. Much older." Malik tried to copy the movement, but his timing was off. Every time he attempted the shoulder roll, he left himself open to imaginary counters. "You're thinking too much," Elijah said. "Boxing isn't a thinking sport once the bell rings. It's a feeling sport. You have to feel the rhythm, feel the distance, feel when your opponent is off balance." "How do you feel rhythm?" "Close your eyes," Elijah instructed. "Now I'm going to throw punches at you. Don't think about where they're coming from. Just feel the air moving, feel the sound, feel the intention behind the punch." Malik closed his eyes, and immediately felt vulnerable. He heard Elijah's feet shuffle, felt the air displacement as a punch whistled past his ear. His instinct was to flinch, to cover up, but Elijah's voice kept him focused. "Don't react to the punch. React to the moment before the punch. Feel when I'm committed to throwing it, when I can't pull back." Gradually, Malik began to understand. It wasn't about seeing the punch coming, it was about feeling the entire sequence of movements that preceded it. After 30 minutes of this drill, he was starting to slip punches he couldn't see. "Open your eyes," Elijah said. When Malik opened his eyes, he felt different. The gym looked the same, but his perception had changed. He could see the rhythm in everything, the way the speed bag bounced, the way other fighters moved, even the way dust motes danced in the light streaming through the windows. "Now we work on counterpunching," Elijah said. "The best defense is making your opponent pay for every attack. You don't just avoid their punches, you make them regret throwing them." Elijah taught him combinations that started with defensive movements and ended with devastating counters. A shoulder roll that flowed into a left hook. A slip that set up an uppercut. A step back that created space for a straight right hand. "The key," Elijah explained, "is to make everything connected. Defense flows into offense, offense flows into defense. There's no pause, no reset. Just continuous motion." As they worked, Malik began to understand that this wasn't just about boxing technique. Elijah was teaching him a philosophy, a way of thinking about conflict that extended far beyond the ring. In life, just like in boxing, You can't just take punishment and hope to survive, Elijah said during a water break. You have to make people think twice about coming at you. You have to establish consequences. Is that how you handled the people who threatened you? Elijah's expression darkened. No. That's where I made my mistake. I thought I could just walk away, that they'd leave me alone if I didn't fight back. But bullies don't respect retreat. They respect strength. What would you do differently? I'd make them understand that destroying me would cost them more than it was worth. I'd document everything, go public, make noise. I'd force them to fight me in the light instead of the shadows. Elijah's voice grew intense. But I was young and scared, and I thought I was protecting my family by staying quiet. And that didn't work. It never works. When you're dealing with people who operate outside the rules, you have to be willing to break some rules yourself. Not moral rules, but social rules. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable, to make enemies, to risk everything. As their training session continued, Malik realized that Elijah wasn't just teaching him to box, he was teaching him to survive. Every technique came with a lesson about life, about standing up for yourself, about the price of both action and inaction. Why are you doing this? Malik asked as they finished up. Why are you helping me? Elijah was quiet for a moment, wrapping up the gloves they'd been using. Because I see the same fire in you that I had. And I see the same choices coming your way. Maybe if I can prepare you better than I was prepared, you'll make better decisions. And if I don't, then at least you'll know what you're choosing. I was blindsided by the corruption, by the threats, by the whole system. You won't be. When they come for you, and they will come for you, you'll be ready. As Elijah returned to his corner, Malik felt a mixture of gratitude and fear. He was learning from a master, but he was also learning about enemies he didn't know he had. The training was making him stronger, but it was also revealing just how dangerous the world of professional boxing really was. The question now wasn't whether he'd face the same challenges Elijah had faced. The question was whether he'd be ready when they came. 3 months of training with Elijah had changed Malik in ways he couldn't have imagined. His boxing had evolved from the raw, aggressive style of a young fighter to something more sophisticated, more dangerous. But it was the conversations between training sessions that truly transformed him. Tell me about your family, Elijah said one evening as they cooled down after a particularly intense session. The gym was empty except for them, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the worn canvas. Not much to tell, Malik replied, unwrapping his hands. My mom works 2 jobs to keep us afloat. My little sister's in high school, trying to get a scholarship to college. My dad. He paused. He's not around. He leave, or did you lose him? He left when I was 12. Said he was going to find work in another city, send money back. Malik's voice grew bitter. That was 7 years ago. Haven't heard from him since. Elijah nodded slowly. And boxing is going to change all that. That's the plan. Get a big enough fight, make enough money, and my mom never has to work again. My sister gets her college paid for. We move out of the projects. Noble goals, Elijah said. But let me ask you something. What happens if you get that big fight and someone tells you that you have to lose it to get the next one? Malik felt his jaw tighten. I'd tell them to go to hell. Would you? Even if they offered you more money to lose than you'd make winning? Even if they threatened to make sure you never fought again? Elijah's voice was gentle but insistent. Even if they showed you pictures of your mother walking to work, your sister walking to school? The blood drained from Malik's face. They wouldn't. They would. And they have. Kid, you think I was the only fighter who got that kind of visit? You think corruption in boxing started and ended with me? Elijah stood up and walked to the ring, gripping the ropes. The system is designed to make you compromise. They wait until you have something to lose, then they threaten to take it away. So what's the answer? Don't have anything to lose? The answer is to be stronger than the system. To have something that can't be taken away. Elijah turned back to him. You know what that is? Malik shook his head. Your integrity. Your sense of who you are when no one's watching. Your ability to look at yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing. Elijah's voice grew intense. They can take your money, your career, your reputation, even your family. But they can't take your soul unless you give it to them. Easy words for a man who lost everything. Exactly. I lost everything, and I'm still here. I'm still me. I can still help you, still teach you, still find meaning in my life. That's because I didn't give them the one thing they really wanted. Which was my submission. My agreement that they were right and I was wrong. My acceptance that their way was the only way. Elijah's eyes blazed with an intensity Malik had never seen before. I may be homeless, I may be forgotten, but I'm not broken. And as long as I'm not broken, I'm still dangerous to them. Malik sat in silence, processing what Elijah had said. You really think they're going to come for me? I know they are. You won your last 3 fights by knockout. You're getting attention from promoters in New York and Las Vegas. Your name is starting to appear in boxing magazines. Elijah sat back down beside him. Success in boxing is like blood in the water. It attracts sharks. What do I do when they come? You remember what I taught you about fighting. You don't back down, you don't give them what they want, and you make them pay for every move they make against you. Elijah's voice grew softer. But most importantly, you remember that winning isn't just about what happens in the ring. It's about who you choose to be when the lights go out. Over the following weeks, Elijah began sharing more specific advice about navigating the side of boxing. He taught Malik about the importance of choosing the right manager, the right promoter, the right fights. He explained how to recognize when a deal was too good to be true, how to spot the warning signs of corruption. Never meet with anyone alone, Elijah advised. Always have witnesses. Record conversations when you can. Document everything. If someone makes you an offer that seems suspicious, don't reject it immediately. That makes you a target. Instead, ask for time to think about it, then find out who else they've made similar offers to. You sound like you're training me to be a detective, not a boxer. In professional boxing, those are the same thing. You have to investigate everyone who wants to work with you, everyone who wants to help you, everyone who claims to have your best interests at heart. Elijah's expression grew grim. Trust is a luxury you can't afford until you're established enough to survive betrayal. That sounds like a lonely way to live. It is. But loneliness is temporary. Corruption is forever. Elijah stood up and began shadowboxing, his movements still fluid despite his age. You know what the hardest part about my fall was? It wasn't losing the money or the fame. It was losing the ability to trust people. But you know what? I'd rather be lonely and honest than rich and corrupt. What about your daughter? Was losing her worth it? Elijah stopped shadowboxing, his face clouding over. That's the one question I can't answer. The one choice I still don't know if I made right. He was quiet for a long moment. But I know this. If I had compromised, if I had become what they wanted me to become, I wouldn't be the man who could teach you what I'm teaching you now. Maybe that's worth something. As their training session ended, Malik felt the weight of Elijah's lessons settling on his shoulders. He was learning to fight, but he was also learning to live with the consequences of his choices. The ring was teaching him about life, and life was teaching him about the price of integrity. The question was, when his moment came, would he have the strength to pay that price? 2 weeks later, Malik got his answer. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit showed up at the gym, asking to speak with him privately. As Malik looked across the gym at Elijah, he saw the older man's face go pale. The Sharks had arrived. The man in the expensive suit introduced himself as Vincent Torino, and his smile was as cold as winter rain. He had the kind of face that belonged in boardrooms and back rooms, places where deals were made that never saw the light of day. Malik Thompson, he said, extending a manicured hand. I've been watching your fights. Very impressive. Malik glanced toward Elijah's corner, but the older man had vanished. Smart, Malik thought. He remembered Elijah's advice about never meeting alone, but Vincent had caught him at the end of training when the gym was nearly empty. "Thank you," Malik replied, not taking the offered hand. "What can I do for you?" Vincent's smile didn't waver. "I represent some people who are very interested in your future. People who could make you rich beyond your wildest dreams." "What kind of people?" "The kind who understand that boxing is a business, not just a sport. The kind who know that sometimes the most profitable outcome isn't necessarily the most obvious one." Vincent pulled out a business card. "We'd like to offer you a very lucrative contract." Malik stared at the card without taking it. "What kind of contract?" "The kind that guarantees you'll make more money in your next 3 fights than most boxers make in their entire careers. Win or lose." Vincent's emphasis on the last 3 words was subtle but unmistakable. "And what would I have to do for this money?" "Just be a professional. Show up, put on a good show, and trust that the people who've been in this business longer than you know what's best for everyone involved." Malik felt his heart racing, but his voice remained steady. "I think I need to discuss this with my team." "Of course. But Malik," Vincent stepped closer, "opportunities like this don't come around often. And they don't stay on the table forever. Some people who've turned down similar offers have found it difficult to get good fights afterward." After Vincent left, Malik sat alone in the gym, staring at the business card. The money Vincent had mentioned was more than his family had made in the past 5 years combined. It was his mother's retirement, his sister's college education, a house in a good neighborhood. All he had to do was lose a few fights at the right times. "He came faster than I expected." Elijah's voice came from behind him. Malik turned to find his mentor emerging from the equipment room where he'd been hiding. "You know him?" "I know the type. Different name, same game." Elijah sat down beside him. "What did he offer you?" Malik told him about the contract, about the guaranteed money, about the subtle threats. As he spoke, he saw Elijah's expression grow darker. "This is it," Elijah said quietly. "This is your moment. Everything we've talked about, everything I've taught you, comes down to what you do next. The money could change everything for my family. It could. And it could destroy everything about who you are." Elijah's voice was gentle but firm. "I won't lie to you, kid. Saying no to these people is going to cost you. They'll make sure you don't get the big fights, the big paydays. They'll spread rumors about you being difficult to work with. Like they did to you. Exactly like they did to me. But there's something I learned too late that I can teach you now." Elijah stood up and began pacing. "You don't have to fight them the way I did. You don't have to suffer in silence." "What do you mean?" "I mean times have changed. Social media, cell phone cameras, 24-hour news cycles. It's harder for people to disappear inconvenient truths now." Elijah's eyes were bright with possibility. "What if instead of just saying no, you exposed them?" "How?" "Record the next meeting. Get them to make their offer explicit. Then go public with it. Make them the story instead of making yourself the victim." Malik felt a chill of fear and excitement. "That's dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous. But this time, you won't be fighting alone." Elijah pulled out a worn cell phone. "I still have contacts in the boxing world. People who've been waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to this system. You could be that someone." Over the next week, Malik made his decision. When Vincent called to arrange a follow-up meeting, Malik agreed, but he came prepared. Hidden in his jacket was a small recording device Elijah had acquired, and waiting in a car outside the restaurant was a journalist friend of Elijah's who had been investigating boxing corruption for years. The meeting went exactly as Elijah had predicted. Vincent made his offer explicit, naming specific fights that needed predetermined outcomes, specific opponents who would cooperate, specific amounts of money that would change hands. He even mentioned other fighters who had accepted similar deals, fighters whose careers had mysteriously flourished after a few convenient losses. When the story broke 2 weeks later, it sent shockwaves through the boxing world. Vincent and his associates were arrested, several prominent fighters were suspended pending investigation, and Malik found himself at the center of a media storm. The backlash was swift and severe. Several promoters refused to work with him, calling him a troublemaker and a snitch. His next 3 scheduled fights were cancelled. For a while, it seemed like his career was over before it had really begun. But something else happened that Elijah hadn't expected. Other fighters began coming forward with their own stories. Young boxers who had been pressured into throwing fights, veterans who had been blacklisted for refusing to cooperate, managers who had been forced to choose between their principles and their livelihoods. A movement began, led by Malik's courage and fueled by decades of suppressed anger. Boxing commissions launched investigations, federal prosecutors got involved, and suddenly the sport that had been rotting from within found itself in the harsh light of public scrutiny. Malik's career didn't end. Instead, it became something greater than he had ever imagined. He became a symbol, a fighter who had chosen integrity over easy money, courage over comfort. The big fights came eventually, but they came clean, earned through skill and heart rather than backroom deals. A year later, Malik stood in his own gym, a gym he'd bought with money from legitimate fights and endorsement deals from companies that wanted to associate themselves with his integrity. In the corner, no longer homeless but employed as his full-time trainer, sat Elijah Stone. "You did something I never could," Elijah said, watching Malik work with a group of young fighters. "You didn't just survive the system. You changed it." "We changed it," Malik corrected. "And we're not done yet." Elijah smiled, his hand unconsciously touching the scar on his cheek. The mark was still there, would always be there, but it no longer represented defeat. Now it represented the price of integrity, the cost of standing up to corruption, the beauty of choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. In the end, Malik learned that winning wasn't just about what happened in the ring. It was about who you chose to be when the lights went out, when the crowds went home, when you had to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you had fought the fights that mattered most. The unseen champion wasn't the one who won the most fights. It was the one who never stopped fighting for what was right.